The sound that snapped the night wasn't music or laughter. It was a thin, bright crack of crystal against tile, a champagne flute giving up mid-toast. I watched it roll in a slow arc under the head table lights, bubbles fizzing across the floor like a secret refusing to stay quiet. Lila's bouquet brushed my arm as she reached for Jacob's hand, her smile pinned in place the way brides are taught to smile. Across the room, Aaron's jaw tightened for a heartbeat and then softened into the easy expression he carries to court. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves and noise and a glass handled carelessly. Still, the sound lingered in my chest like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. If I had been braver, I would have followed that sound straight to the truth. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comment city and state. If you're comfortable, and if stories about truth and justice speak to you, please like and subscribe so more people can find them. My name is Meredith, and for most of my 30s, I believed our life was the kind people point to when they're trying to be optimistic. We bought a colonial with white shutters on a maple-lined street in suburban Maryland, the kind of place where the UPS driver knows your dog and the neighbor kids leave chalk art on the sidewalk. I worked nights at the children's hospital, learned the rhythms of beeping monitors and sleepy cartoons, and came home to a porch swing Aaron swore he'd repaint every spring. He made partner track war shirts that smelled faintly of cedar and starch and teased me about the way I organized our pantry by label height. I was the steady one list meal prep Saturday runs along the river. Lila was brightness and motion, forever stepping into better light, laughing as she filmed her coffee and her shoes, her good angles and glorious hair. Growing up, my mother joked that Lila came out ready for an audience, and I came out ready to keep everyone fed. We never competed on paper, but in family photos, I can see it now, the way I tilted toward the task, and Lila tilted toward the lens. It didn't make me love her less. If anything, it made me protective in a way that felt motherly long before either of us thought about babies. Aaron and I met at a fundraiser in a church basement where the coffee tasted like metal, and we talked through the raffle drawing about work that mattered and the small ways grown-ups can be brave. He held my hand during a storm on our third date, and later he held me when a pregnancy ended before it began. When we finally married, my parents cried in the pew, and Lila fixed my veil with fingers that didn't tremble. We built rituals: Wednesday, pasta night; Thursday, movie night; Sunday morning, bagels on the porch. Ordinary things that feel holy when you're not worrying about losing them. Money wasn't a problem, not really, but it was a difference. My paycheck stretched across nights and shifts his gathered in tidy quarterly bonuses. Lila joked I had the stable saint job, and Aaron had the sharp suit job, and Jacob, who sold software I couldn't pretend to understand, had the kind of optimism that buys people expensive headphones for fun. The four of us fit easily for a while, double dates, yard games at my parents' cookouts, group texts about whether potato salad can be considered a meal. It was a good picture. It held. When Lila got engaged, our family exploded with lists and laughter. My mother started a binder with tabs. My father circled reception venues like he was picking lots for a new build. Lila asked me to stand beside her as maid of honor, and she asked Aaron to stand with Jacob because she said she wanted family on both sides of him. I tried not to overthink the phrase, and I didn't. Not then. I let myself enjoy the cake tastings and the dress fittings and the way joy can make a whole room feel lighter by 6 degrees. The first hairline crack didn't look like a crack at all. It looked like convenience. Aaron's late nights bunched closer together, then spilled into Saturdays now and then. His phone, once abandoned on the kitchen island, learned a passcode and started living in his pocket. I told myself trial prep is a season, and seasons pass, the way we tell ourselves winter always remembers how to become spring. When I asked about the passcode, he smiled, kissed my hair, and muttered something about client confidentiality, and I decided to believe him because that is what decent people do with the people they love. Around the same time, Lila's calendar grew crowded with vendor meetings and content shoots, and she dropped Sunday brunch twice in a month, claiming exhaustion. It felt normal. Weddings are a job, but every time she hugged me goodbye, I caught a trace of a perfume I couldn't place, warm and citrusy with a sandalwood finish that tugged at my memory. She laughed more with her phone than with me, and Jacob, who is earnest to a fault, said she was dialed in lately and asked if I could help remind her to eat. I made extra lasagna, dropped it at her new apartment, and told myself this is what sisters do when life gets busy. The night of the engagement party, the porch twinkled with string lights and mason jars, and I carried a platter of shrimp past the sliding door, just in time to hear Aaron's low laugh blend with Lila's softer giggle. It was nothing at first, just two voices that have always been familiar to me until the silence that followed stretched a half-second too long. When I stepped outside, they were inches farther apart than people normally stand, both smiling in a performance of ease. I set down the platter, made some joke about the mosquitoes, and watched my sister glance at my husband the way people glance at windows to check their reflection. By the time we posed for photos under the oak tree, the scent I couldn't place had found a home in the collar of Aaron's shirt. I pressed my face to his shoulder for the camera and felt it bloom warm, citrus sandalwood, and the tiniest thought I've ever had rose like a splinter. I know this smell from somewhere I don't want to name. I swallowed it with bubbly and told myself not to be dramatic. But as the night wound down and we boxed leftover cupcakes, the broken ring of a glass on tile kept chiming in the back of my mind, and I knew, as surely as I know the sound of a heart monitor at 3 a.m., that something in our picture had moved. The weeks after Lila's engagement party seemed to pass in a blur of fittings and tastings, yet something inside me felt unsettled. Aaron's schedule became more demanding than ever, with late nights that stretched until dawn and weekends that he claimed were swallowed by urgent casework. At first, I accepted it because lawyers in his position were expected to grind through long hours. But when his phone stopped living on the kitchen counter and started living in his jacket pocket, always face down, I felt a shift that left me uneasy. He had never needed a password before, yet suddenly one was in place, explained away as firm policy. I wanted to believe him the way wives want to believe the man they've built a life with. He had held me through illness, through loss, through mornings when we had nothing to say, but still managed to laugh over burnt toast. I kept reminding myself of that man whenever doubts whispered too loudly. But little by little, things that once felt natural now carried a weight I couldn't shake. The inside jokes fell away. Our Thursday movie nights became memories instead of traditions, and when I reached for his hand in bed, his fingers often remained still. At the same time, Lila was suddenly too busy for our regular Sunday brunches. She claimed vendors had canceled last minute or she was shooting content that couldn't be rescheduled. When she showed up, she carried herself with a new glow that she blamed on stress and excitement. But it felt different, like energy she was drawing from someplace I couldn't see. She smelled of a perfume I couldn't place. Something warm and citrusy with an edge of wood that tugged at me like an almost memory. I didn't ask, though. Sisters share 1,000 things, but I wasn't ready to name the thing I feared most. Still, my mind began collecting fragments like puzzle pieces. Aaron claimed to be at the gym at odd hours, but his running shoes remained spotless in the mudroom. Lila told Jacob she was interested in learning more about law, which puzzled me since Jacob's work was all technology. They both missed family gatherings on the same weekends, their excuses separate, but somehow too neatly aligned. And every time Aaron's phone buzzed, I caught the way his mouth curved into a smile that wasn't for me. My mother noticed me watching them once during a Sunday dinner, when the family was reviewing cake designs. "You're staring," she whispered, touching my hand with a worried frown. I forced a smile and said everything was fine, that everything was perfect. The word burned my tongue even as I spoke it. Lila leaned across the table to show Aaron a photo of a cake swirled in pale roses, and he nodded with interest, as though pastry had suddenly become a passion of his. I kept chewing my chicken, feeling the weight of a silence that only I seemed to hear. The real fracture came by accident, as many do. I was at the hospital for my annual checkup, moving through the sterile hallways I knew so well when I bumped into Dr. Patricia Moore, Lila's longtime gynecologist. She greeted me warmly, asking after the wedding plans with the easy familiarity of someone who had watched us grow up. "Make sure your sister doesn't overdo it," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "First trimester can be exhausting." Her words dropped into me like ice water. I asked her to repeat herself, pretending I hadn't heard. Patricia's face paled immediately. "Oh, she hasn't told you? I just assumed, with the wedding so close." I forced a laugh, covered with a quick assurance that of course I knew. We both pretended the moment had not happened, but by the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely fit the key into the ignition. Pregnant. Lila was pregnant, and she hadn't said a word. But it wasn't her silence alone that left me gasping in that parking garage. It was the arithmetic. If she was in her first trimester now, that pointed straight back to the engagement party, to the porch, to the perfume I had smelled on Aaron's shirt. I told myself Jacob was the father. Of course, Jacob was the father. Yet I repeated the math again and again until the numbers blurred, and the fear beneath them grew into something I could no longer ignore. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, as Aaron slept beside me, his breathing steady, his body turned just slightly away. I thought about the ring he had slipped on my finger, the promises we had made in front of everyone we loved, and how words can sound so solid until they collapse under truth. I began to plan quietly not to expose them, at least not yet, but to confirm what my heart already knew. If there was betrayal, I would not stumble into it blindly. I would meet it with open eyes. The first step was his office. Aaron kept it locked, claiming client confidentiality, but I had a key made years ago after he lost his original. He never knew I'd kept it. One afternoon, when he was still working late, I slipped inside. His desk was neat, his files stacked in precise rows, his computer waiting behind the glow of a password screen. For a man so clever in court, he could be simple in private. His password was our anniversary. I told myself I might find nothing, that I was only being suspicious. But once inside, I checked his email, his browser history, his case files. All of it was clean. Too clean. Then I remembered the podcasts I listened to on night shifts, how investigators always said people forget the cloud. I opened his photo backups, scrolling through thousands of images, family parties, work dinners, vacations. My pulse raced as I scrolled deeper until I found a folder titled Legal Research. Inside were images that had nothing to do with law. Lila's smile at a beach I didn't recognize. A selfie of them together in a hotel bar, his arm around her waist, her hand resting on his chest. More photos followed, each one pulling at my breath until the final image landed like a blow. A pregnancy test. Positive. The date stamped 2 weeks after the engagement party. The background unmistakable, our bedroom, our bed. I closed the folder, carefully cleared the history, and locked the office again. My body shook so violently I barely reached the bathroom before retching into the sink. By the time I rinsed my mouth, my reflection in the mirror was pale and unrecognizable. That night, I slid beneath the sheets beside him, listening to his even breaths, and I whispered nothing. My silence became my mask, the only way I could survive while I waited for the next moment to act. The days that followed demanded performance. I helped Lila choose earrings that would draw the eye away from her slightly fuller cheeks. I listened as Aaron suggested we take a trip after the wedding to reconnect. I gave a speech at the rehearsal dinner about love and loyalty, hugging my sister tightly as she told the room she was lucky to have me. The swell of her stomach pressed against mine for a fleeting second, and I felt something inside me fracture all over again. Through it all, I kept my voice steady, my smile bright, my movements careful. But every word I spoke was a rehearsal of sorts, not for celebration, but for war. I was learning how to carry truth without showing its weight, how to hold my rage behind the curve of a smile. No one around me knew the storm gathering just beyond my lips. And as the wedding day drew nearer, I realized there would be no turning back. I could not unknow the images I had seen. I could not erase the arithmetic that haunted my every breath. What remained was timing when to move, when to speak, and how to make sure they understood that nothing built on lies can stand. The days leading up to the wedding were the hardest I'd ever lived through. Outwardly, I looked like the loyal sister, moving between vendors, with Lila helping my mother track final payments and smiling through conversations about color palettes. Inside, I carried the weight of photographs that I couldn't unsee and calculations that pointed toward a truth too cruel to speak aloud. Every small gesture from Aaron felt like a performance now, and every smile from Lila seemed to shimmer with secrets. It was as though I was trapped in a play where everyone knew their lines but me. When Lila came by to try on her gown one last time, I knelt on the bedroom carpet, adjusting the hem as she admired herself in the mirror. She touched her stomach briefly, just the faintest graze, then dropped her hand when she caught me watching. Nerves, she laughed, but her reflection betrayed her. The glow that people attributed to bridal happiness looked different to me now, like a light borrowed from somewhere it shouldn't be. I forced a smile and kept pinning the fabric, telling her she looked beautiful, because those were the words I was expected to say. Aaron grew more attentive in those weeks, as if he sensed me slipping away. He kissed my forehead every morning, complimented dinners I barely tasted, and slipped an arm around my shoulders in public. To outsiders, it looked like devotion, but to me, it was a disguise that smelled faintly of her perfume. Sometimes, when he leaned in close, I caught a trace of citrus and wood that made my stomach twist. At night, I lay beside him in silence, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, and wondering how many other nights he had breathed beside her. I became skilled at pretending. At the rehearsal dinner, I stood before 100 friends and relatives, delivering a speech about sisterhood and love. My voice never trembled, though my hands felt like ice around the microphone. Lila hugged me afterward, whispering that I was the best sister anyone could hope for. Her body pressed against mine, and I felt the subtle curve of her secret between us. My throat tightened, but I smiled for the cameras, the dutiful maid of honor caught in flash after flash of a night that would soon feel like a cruel joke. Even my mother began to notice the change in me. She cornered me in the kitchen one afternoon as I arranged centerpieces, asking if I was sleeping enough. "You look pale," she said, brushing a stray hair from my face. I told her wedding stress was wearing me down, that it wasn't easy being the organized one. She accepted the answer with a frown but didn't press further. I could see she wanted to believe me the way I had once wanted to believe Aaron, but beneath her concern, I sensed a question forming that I wasn't ready to answer. The nights were the worst. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling fan, feeling the stillness of the house around me. I thought about the promise rings exchanged at our own wedding, the vows Aaron had whispered when he thought forever meant something. I thought about childhood nights when Lila crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, how I'd promised to always protect her. Now those memories felt like ghosts, reminders that the people I loved most could become strangers in an instant. Tears came quietly in the dark, absorbed by pillows, never loud enough for him to hear. Once, I nearly broke. Aaron came home late, his tie loosened, exhaustion etched across his face. He found me at the dining table, surrounded by stacks of place cards and ribbons. "You're working too hard," he murmured, rubbing my shoulders with familiar tenderness. For a moment, I wanted to turn to bury my face in his chest and demand the truth to scream about photographs and timelines. Instead, I swallowed it all, nodded, and let him think he had comforted me. After he went upstairs, I sat alone until dawn, staring at the neat piles of names that meant nothing compared to the name I could no longer say without bitterness. Jacob remained blissfully unaware, excited about the life he believed he was beginning. He pulled me aside at the rehearsal to ask if Lila seemed tired, if maybe the stress was getting to her. His eyes were full of worry and devotion, and it made my stomach churn. He loved her without suspicion, without hesitation, the way I once loved Aaron. I wanted to warn him, to put my hands on his shoulders and tell him to run before the truth crushed him. Instead, I said she was just tired, that weddings take their toll. It was the cruelest kindness I'd ever offered. On the morning of the wedding, I helped Lila into her gown, fastening the delicate buttons along her back. She was radiant cheeks, flushed eyes, shining a vision of everything a bride should be. She turned to me, gripping my hands, and whispered that this was the happiest day of her life. I managed a nod, the words catching in my throat, because all I could think about was the folder hidden in Aaron's cloud, the image of a pregnancy test glowing against the backdrop of my own quilt. My sister's joy pressed against my chest, suffocating, but I held it together with a smile that felt carved in stone. The ceremony moved like a dream. I walked down the aisle, first bouquet, trembling slightly in my hands, and took my place near the altar. Aaron stood with the groomsmen dashing in his tuxedo, and for a moment our eyes met. He winked, a small gesture meant to reassure, and I nearly faltered in step. When Lila appeared at the entrance, glowing in lace and pearls, Jacob's face crumpled with tears. The church echoed with words of love and devotion, words that mocked me even as they brought others to tears. I stood in silence, my heart splintering with every vow. By the time the reception began, I felt like a porcelain doll painted with a smile moved into place, for photos lifted for toasts. Guests laughed, the band played, and glasses clinked. To everyone else, it was a celebration. To me, it was a performance staged on quicksand. I watched Aaron lean close to Lila during the best man's speech, his lips near her ear, in a gesture that could be mistaken for politeness. My chest ached with the effort of staying still, of pretending not to notice the tremor in her smile. Later that evening, I slipped out onto the balcony while the music swelled inside. The city lights stretched beyond the river, a beautiful view that only made me feel more hollow. Aaron found me there, pressing a glass of wine into my hand, telling me I'd made him fall in love with me all over again after my speech. His arms settled around me, warm and heavy, as if nothing had ever broken between us. I held the glass carefully, the liquid bitter on my tongue, and nodded in silence. It was easier than telling him that every word I'd spoken had been laced with poison. I went to bed that night in the hotel room reserved for the bridal party, lying beneath crisp sheets that smelled of lavender. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I replayed every moment, every glance, every half smile that had passed between them. My mind clung to details, searching for a thread of denial, but there was none. The truth was woven into everything now, and I was drowning in it. I knew then that I couldn't keep silent forever. Sooner or later, the weight would break me, or I would use it to break them. But not yet. Timing was everything, and I needed the perfect moment. Until then, I would remain the sister who smiled, the wife who stood beside her husband, the woman no one suspected. The morning of Lila's wedding broke with skies so blue they seemed painted the kind of day people call a blessing. Sunlight filled my parents' home where the bridal party had gathered, bouncing across mirrors and polished wood floors. I moved through the rooms with practiced ease, pinning veils, fastening shoes, and adjusting jewelry, all while my insides churned with truths no one else could see. When I helped Lila step into her gown, the silk clung to her form, concealing the secret she carried, just long enough to fool the crowd waiting beyond the church doors. She turned to me, glowing with anticipation, and squeezed my hand. "This is everything I've dreamed of," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I nodded and adjusted her veil, forcing my face into a mask of calm. Her eyes searched mine as if she sensed a hesitation, but she dismissed it quickly, laughing softly about mascara smudges and champagne waiting at the reception. I held her close in a quick embrace, feeling the faint swell of her stomach press against me, and I swallowed the storm rising in my throat. The church smelled faintly of lilies and old wood, a mix of tradition and celebration. Guests filled the pews in shades of pastels and dark suits, their chatter falling quiet as the organ began to play. I walked the aisle first, bouquet trembling slightly in my hands, and took my place at the altar. Aaron stood across from me with the groomsman, the black of his tux crisp against the glow of stained glass. Our eyes met briefly, and he smiled the way a husband should smile at his wife, though I could no longer trust what that look meant. When Lila appeared at the entrance, the room seemed to hold its breath. She looked breathtaking, radiant in lace and pearls, her hand steady in Jacob's as he guided her forward. Jacob's face shone with love tears streaking unchecked down his cheeks, and for a fleeting moment, I envied his innocence. The vows echoed through the high-ceiling words of devotion, promises to cherish, to forsake all others. My eyes drifted to Aaron, catching the way he stared at Lila with a softness I recognized all too well. It was the expression he once saved for me. The ceremony ended in applause and camera flashes, and the newlyweds kissed as if the world belonged to them. I clapped and smiled with everyone else, though inside I was already planning. My mask held as we moved to the reception, a grand hall filled with chandeliers and white roses. Ice sculptures gleamed in the corners, and a band played soft jazz while waiters poured champagne. Aaron slid his hand along my back, leaning down to tell me how beautiful I looked. I answered with a polite laugh, hiding the way my skin crawled beneath his touch. The speeches stretched long into the evening. Friends told stories about college days and inside jokes. Family members offered blessings and wishes for children to come. I listened to every word, waiting for my moment, my heart beating in time with the clinking glasses. When my turn came, I stood spoon-tapping against the rim of my glass until the room fell silent. My voice carried steady as I spoke about sisterhood, about love, about the foundation of truth needed for a marriage to survive. The crowd nodded, smiling, unaware that every sentence carried a blade. When I sat down, Lila dabbed her eyes, whispering that she loved me. Aaron kissed my cheek and called it a perfect speech. I clenched his hand in mine just long enough for him to wince, then released it with a smile. The music swelled again, the dance floor filled, and the night moved on. Yet my thoughts remained sharp, circling the evidence I carried inside me like hidden armor. Timing was everything, and I was waiting for the moment no one could ignore. Later, I stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching Aaron and Lila dance. To anyone else, it was innocent, a bride sharing a moment with her brother-in-law. But I saw the way his hand trembled on her waist, the way she bit her lip at something he whispered. Their eyes darted around the room as though afraid of being caught, yet neither of them noticed me watching. My chest ached with the effort of holding my face neutral, but I stayed still, sipping my wine until the taste turned bitter. The announcement came near the end of dinner. Jacob, glowing with joy, took the microphone and said they had something to share. Lila placed a hand on her stomach, her smile wide as she told the room they were expecting a baby. The hall erupted in cheers, glasses raised high, relatives rushing to congratulate them. My parents embraced the couple with tears in their eyes. Guests pressed forward with hugs, and the photographer snapped away to capture every angle of their joy. I remained seated, clapping politely, my mind running through numbers I had already calculated 100 times. 8 weeks. The timing placed conception 2 weeks after the engagement party, the same week Aaron had claimed to work late. My stomach twisted as I studied his face. He clapped and smiled with everyone else, but I caught the flicker in his jaw, the tightness that betrayed him. He played his role well, but not perfectly. When it was my turn to congratulate them, I hugged Lila tightly, my lips close to her ear. "How far along?" I whispered, my voice calm. 8 weeks, she whispered back, trembling with excitement. My smile never faltered as I pulled away, congratulating her again, loud enough for others to hear. Jacob beamed, oblivious, already planning aloud for nurseries and names. I nodded, my chest hollow, knowing the truth was only a breath away from destroying him. I excused myself soon after, claiming I needed fresh air. On the terrace, the night breeze cooled my flushed skin, carrying the faint scent of roses from the gardens below. I leaned against the stone railing, staring at the river glittering under the moonlight. My heart pounded as the weight of what I carried pressed harder. The proof was in my possession, the timing undeniable, the truth ready to detonate. The only question left was when. Behind me, the band struck up another song, laughter spilling through the open doors. I straightened, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and drew in a steadying breath. The time for doubt had passed. All that remained was the moment I would choose to let the truth speak for itself, no matter the cost. The band had just shifted to a slower tune when I felt the walls closing in. Lila glowed under the chandeliers, her hand resting proudly on her stomach, while Jacob gazed at her, like the world began and ended in her. Applause and laughter circled them, voices lifted in celebration, but I couldn't hear any of it clearly. I moved toward the terrace doors, my dress brushing against polished floors, my heart pounding with a rhythm that demanded release. The night air struck my face, sharp and cool, and I gripped the railing, staring at the dark water beyond. I didn't have long alone. The sound of leather shoes against stone announced Aaron before he spoke. "What's wrong?" he asked, careful as if reading the edge of my tone. I turned, holding his gaze. "How long?" The question landed like glass shattering. He blinked, then looked away, pretending not to understand. "Meredith." I cut him off. "Don't insult me. How long have you been with her?" He sat heavily on the stone bench, shoulders sagging, the fight draining from his body before it began. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered, his voice low. But it did. That night at the engagement party, and then again, 2 months later. My chest burned, but my voice remained steady. "And the baby? Is it yours?" He rubbed his hands over his face, finally looking at me with eyes I no longer recognized. "I don't know. She swears it's Jacob's." His answer was worse than a confession. It was cowardice wrapped in hope. I stood tall, the weight of years pressing down on me, and for the first time, I no longer felt powerless. "You've had your chance to explain," I said quietly. "Now it's my turn." His lips parted, some plea forming, but I didn't wait. I left him on that terrace and walked back into the ballroom with a calm I didn't know I had. The plan I'd carried silently for weeks was ready to unfold. The bandleader was easy to find. I slipped a folded bill into his hand, leaned close, and asked for the microphone. He nodded, announced me with cheer, and suddenly the chatter softened. Chairs scraped back, and hundreds of eyes turned my way. I stood beneath the crystal light's glass in hand, smile fixed in place. I know I spoke earlier. I began my voice smooth, but I'd like to say one more thing in honor of my sister and her new husband. Tonight we've heard about love devotion and the beautiful start of a family. The crowd murmured with approval, glasses lifted again. I paused, letting the silence expand, then added, "But the thing about family is that it can't survive without honesty. Secrets have a way of finding their voice." I turned to Lila, her face pale now, her fingers tightening on Jacob's hand. "8 weeks ago, you said you had a late meeting at the Marriott. I remember it clearly. Funny how that lines up perfectly with your pregnancy." Gasps rippled through the room, conversations breaking into whispers. Jacob's brow furrowed as he glanced between us. Aaron appeared at the edge of the crowd, frozen in place. "Of course," I continued. "We all know coincidences happen. 2 people, same hotel, same night. But sometimes coincidence is just another word for truth we don't want to face." Lila's lips parted, but no sound came. Jacob rose slowly, releasing her hand. "What is she talking about?" His voice cracked like timber under strain. I raised my glass one final time, my smile sharp as glass. "Here's to truth, the only foundation that can hold a marriage. May it never be hidden, and may it never be betrayed." Then I set the glass down and stepped aside, leaving the silence to do its work. It didn't take long. Jacob's face drained of color as he turned to Lila. "Is it true?" he asked, voice breaking. She reached for him, tears brimming, but he pulled away. His voice rose raw and guttural. "Tell me, is the child mine? Or is it your sister's husband's?" Aaron tried to move forward, stammering Jacob, but Jacob struck him with a force that echoed through the hall. Aaron crumpled, blood running down his face, while guests gasped and stumbled back. My father looked ready to join in until my mother gripped his arm, her face ashen. Lila's sobs filled the silence, her gown pooling around her as she collapsed into a chair. I stood steady in the storm, my chest heaving, but my face calm. For months, I had carried their secret in silence. Now it was theirs to carry in the open. Every guest had seen every camera, had captured every whisper would spread by morning. Aaron rose, slowly clutching a napkin to his bleeding nose, his eyes darting to me in desperation. "Meredith, we can talk." I shook my head once, firm final. He froze, words dying on his lips. Lila looked up at me, then mascara streaking her expression, twisted in disbelief. "How could you do this?" she sobbed. I leaned close enough for only her to hear. "How could you?" The reception unraveled within minutes. Guests gathered their coats and clutched purses, some too shocked to look me in the eye, others offering silent nods of understanding. My parents remained frozen, my mother whispering prayers, my father muttering curses under his breath. Jacob walked out without a word, shoulders rigid, leaving Lila reaching after him with trembling hands. I stayed until the room emptied, until the cake stood untouched, until the flowers began to wilt in the heavy air. When I finally walked out, I held my head high. The mask I had worn for so long had been stripped away, and in its place was something harder, sharper. That night, in the quiet of my own house, I sat at Aaron's desk and began pulling files. Bank statements, credit card receipts, investment portfolios. I knew where everything was kept after years of marriage. As the evidence piled before me, a plan solidified. His betrayal had cost me my heart, but now it would cost him far more. The morning after the wedding felt like the air itself was heavy with ash. My phone buzzed, endlessly messages from relatives, colleagues, even neighbors who had already heard what happened. Gossip travels faster than any truth. But this time, they were one and the same. I ignored most of it, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before I ever tasted it. Aaron hadn't come home, and I didn't expect him to. I knew he was scrambling to do damage control, but what he hadn't realized yet was that I had no intention of staying quiet anymore. The folder I'd prepared sat in front of me, thick with papers I'd pulled from his desk. Bank statements, travel receipts, credit card charges, proof of hotels' dinners, and gifts, all charged under accounts linked to his firm. He had been careless, arrogant, even assuming no one would look closely, but I had looked, and I intended to put every piece of it where it would cause the most pain. I dialed the number for his firm's managing partner, a man named Richard Daly, who had shaken my hand warmly at countless holiday parties. His assistant put me on hold for several minutes before he finally came on the line. "Mrs. Cole," he said, voice tight. "I trust you're aware of the disruption at last night's event." I let the silence linger for a beat before answering. "Yes, Mr. Daly. I'm also aware of your junior partner's repeated misuse of company funds for personal affairs. If you'd like documentation, I'd be glad to provide it." The pause on the other end stretched long enough that I could hear the faint ticking of my kitchen clock. "Send it over," he said, finally. His voice clipped. "We'll review immediately." I hung up my hands steady, then slipped the copies into a sealed envelope and walked them straight to the courier office downtown. By the time Aaron realized what I'd done, it would already be too late. That evening, Aaron showed up at the house, his tie loose, his face drawn. He smelled faintly of whiskey, though his words were clear. "Meredith, please," he began. "Don't do this. Don't drag the firm into it." I stood in the doorway, blocking his entry. "You dragged them into it the moment you used their accounts to pay for hotel rooms. I just made sure they knew." He exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to his forehead. "I can fix this. We can fix this. Just think about what you're doing." I met his eyes and said calmly, "I've been thinking about what you did. And now, finally, I'm done protecting you." He left without another word, and I closed the door behind him, locking it for the first time in our marriage. My hands trembled after, but not from fear. It was the tremor of release, of setting a weight down after carrying it too long. That night, I opened my laptop and began uploading photographs, the hotel selfies, the messages, even the pregnancy test, onto a private folder. With a single click, I shared it anonymously with a handful of mutual friends and family members. Screenshots spread like wildfire, forwarded and whispered about until there was no corner of our circle left untouched. The fallout came swiftly. Within a week, Aaron was placed on leave pending investigation. His colleagues, once jovial at barbecues and fundraisers, no longer returned his calls. The firm released a statement about their commitment to integrity, thinly veiled, but enough for everyone to understand who it was aimed at. Meanwhile, Jacob filed for annulment, his lawyers citing fraud and misrepresentation. Lila moved back into my parents' house, her influencer contracts drying up as brands quietly withdrew. Every click of my phone brought new updates, his suspension, her unraveling, but none of it surprised me. I had started the avalanche, and now I watched it bury them both. One afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off groceries. Lila was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and eyes swollen. She looked up at me with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You've ruined everything," she whispered. I set the bags on the counter to Marcir and met her gaze evenly. "No, Lila. You ruined it yourself. I just stopped hiding it for you." My mother hovered in the doorway, torn between us, her face etched with lines I hadn't noticed before. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, leaving the room in silence. It was Margaret who called me later that night, her voice low. "You've made your point, Meredith," she said, but she's still your sister. I sat in my darkened living room, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between us. She stopped being my sister when she climbed into my husband's bed, I replied. My mother sighed, weary, but she didn't argue. She knew as well as I did that some lines once crossed can never be redrawn. The more their lives unraveled, the calmer I felt. I hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, hadn't struck back in fury. I had simply let the truth do the work. And the truth, once uncovered, doesn't go back into hiding. I knew Aaron was trying to salvage his career, but even if the firm forgave him, the stain of scandal would follow. Lila might still have the baby, but she would raise it under the shadow of suspicion, never certain whose child it truly was. One evening, I sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea, watching the last light fade over the neighborhood. The phone buzzed beside me with a message from an unknown number. It was Aaron, his words short and sharp. "You'll regret this." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. Regret belonged to him, not me. I had carried mine long enough, and I wasn't about to take his on as well. The official letter arrived on a Thursday, sealed with the firm's insignia and delivered by courier. I didn't need to open it to know what it contained, but I slit the envelope anyway. Suspension had turned into termination, effective immediately. Aaron's name was stripped from every file his office cleared by assistants instructed not to answer questions. Years of late nights, courtroom victories, and ambition had dissolved into a single page of legal language. I folded the letter neatly and set it on the counter, leaving it there for him to collect when he realized there was nothing left to fight for. He came by that evening, his face hollow, his suit rumpled like it had been worn for days. He tried to sound defiant, slamming the letter down and accusing me of ruining him. "Do you know what you've done?" he barked. I looked at him calmly, my voice steady. "I didn't ruin you, Aaron. You did that all by yourself. I just stopped covering the cracks." He stared at me, waiting for me to flinch, but I didn't. For once, the silence belonged to me, and he left without another word. The divorce papers followed quickly, delivered by my attorney with the efficiency I had come to admire. Her name was Caroline Hensley, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She walked me through every clause, every asset, every safeguard to ensure Aaron couldn't find a way back into my life. "You're in a strong position," she said, sliding the paperwork across her desk. "His misconduct, the financial records, the photographs, it's more than enough." I nodded, grateful not just for her skill, but for the dignity she carried, the kind I aspired to rebuild in myself. The community that had once admired Lila began to turn on her as well. Clients pulled out of collaborations, contracts were quietly dissolved, and followers on social media dwindled by the thousands. Neighbors whispered when she walked down the street, their sympathy saved for Jacob, who had moved back to his family's estate and refused every attempt she made to reach him. My parents struggled in the middle, my mother wringing her hands, as if she could press us back into the shape we once held. But even she couldn't deny the devastation, and my father's anger left little room for forgiveness. One evening, I passed by their house to drop off some prescriptions my mother had asked for. Lila was on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, her hair unbrushed, her eyes swollen. She looked at me as though I held the power to undo what had been done. "Please," she whispered, "don't let them all hate me." I paused, the bag of medicine heavy in my hand. "I didn't make them hate you, Lila," I said softly. "You gave them the reasons." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing more, and I walked inside to find my mother waiting with a weary expression. Jacob filed for annulment within weeks, the legal documents citing deception and irreparable breach of trust. When the results of the paternity test came back, the truth sealed itself in black and white. The child was Aaron's. My mother cried until her voice went hoarse. My father sat in silence with his jaw set like stone, and Lila locked herself in her room. The result was no surprise to me. I had known all along, but seeing it printed on a page gave it weight no one could deny. It was the final nail in a coffin I had never asked to build. The humiliation that followed was public and merciless. At the grocery store, I overheard two women whispering about the heart girl who had a baby with her sister's husband. At church, heads turned when my parents walked in, pity etched into every glance. Even my colleagues at the hospital, though kind, carried curiosity in their eyes, as though wondering how I managed to walk upright with so much chaos in my life. But I did walk upright, shoulders squared, because I refused to let their choices dictate my dignity any longer. Aaron tried to negotiate sending messages through mutual friends about settlements and forgiveness. Caroline advised me to stay silent to let the documents and the evidence speak for themselves. "He wants you to bend," she said, "because he's used to you doing it. Don't give him that satisfaction now." I listened, and for once I didn't bend. I watched as his world shrank, as the invitation stopped, as the colleagues who once praised him now crossed the street to avoid conversation. Justice didn't roar. It whispered slowly, stripping him of the image he had built until nothing remained. Lila's world collapsed more quietly, but no less completely. She had built her life on attention, on validation from strangers who loved her curated glow. Now the glow had dimmed, and in its place came silence, broken only by the occasional cruel comment that slipped through her carefully guarded feed. She tried to reinvent herself, posting about resilience and motherhood, but the response was hollow. She had lost the one thing she valued most, her audience's belief. Without it, she was adrift, trapped in the house she once escaped so eagerly. Through it all, I felt no triumph, only release. I hadn't screamed or clawed or begged. I had simply unveiled the truth and stepped back. Watching their lives unravel wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance, about letting the scales tip back to where they belonged. Still, I couldn't ignore the quiet satisfaction that came when I looked around my home, free of his things, free of their shadows, and felt the space belonged to me again. One evening, as I sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea, Margaret joined me. She didn't speak for a long time, her hands folded in her lap, her face drawn with lines of worry. Finally, she said, "I wish I could mend what's been broken." I looked at her, at the woman who had raised us both, and said gently, "Some things aren't meant to be mended, Mom. Some things are meant to be learned from." She nodded, tears gathering, and we sat together in the fading light, two women bound by blood, but changed forever, by choices neither of us made. The quiet after the storm was not empty, it was healing. The gossip faded, the courtroom battles ended, and the weight of betrayal slowly lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I could breathe without anger pressing against my ribs. My home, once heavy with secrets, became a place of peace again. Each room carried only my presence, my choices, my future. Aaron tried once to write me a letter. I read it with steady eyes, his apologies spilling across the page in words that had come far too late. He admitted the truth, confessed his failures, and spoke of regret. I didn't feel triumph or sorrow, just a certainty that he no longer had any place in my story. I let the pages burn to ash in my fireplace, the smoke curling upward like a final farewell. Lila's world dimmed in ways I had never imagined possible for her. The spotlight she had built so carefully flickered out, leaving her with only shadows and silence. She raised her child, Aaron's child, with the determination of someone trying to prove herself, but her charm no longer held its grip on the world. For me, she became a figure in the distance, a reminder of what I would not allow back into my life. Blood ties could not erase the harm she had done. My parents tried to bridge the divide, their hearts torn between daughters. My mother longed for harmony, but even she came to accept that forgiveness and closeness are not the same thing. My father, more stern, understood my choice to protect my peace. Family is not only about who we are born to, but about who proves themselves worthy of trust. In time, I found strength in helping others who had endured the same kind of betrayal. I spoke softly to women who sat across from me in pain, their stories echoing my own. I told them that survival was not about forgetting, but about moving through, about building something truer from the pieces left behind. In their faces, I saw my own healing reflected back. Life did not return to what it had been. It became something new. The house was mine. The garden flourished again, and I filled the quiet with laughter from friends who had stood beside me. I no longer measured my worth through anyone else's promises. My dignity was mine to keep, and no betrayal could take it from me again. Looking back, I see not just the loss, but the gift hidden inside it. Betrayal stripped away illusions and forced me to stand in truth. It taught me that strength is not in pretending everything is perfect, but in walking away when it is not. Justice, in the end, was not only their downfall, it was my freedom. Before we close, I'd love to know which part of this journey touched you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments. I would be honored to hear them. And if you'd like to spend more nights with stories of resilience, family, and justice, you're welcome to stay connected here.